Hey everyone, it's James Wagley. Welcome to another episode of the MBA podcast. And as always, I have the man, the myth, the legend with me in the black corner. Always the black corner. Ash, how are you today, my friend?
Well, James, we're in early spring, so I'm in my traditional black preparing.
Mhm. Good to see. Good to see. Listeners, hopefully you're doing well as well. So the episode today is about the full hands-off business. So, when we think about what does that even mean, the full hands-off business, like you could have a great support team around you. And we know a lot of brokers, Ash, that have built great systems and team around them so that they can show up and just talk to clients and the rest just happens. Like that can be a great supported broker business, but it's not a full hands-off business. So I guess we want to talk today about the concept of um, going from a solo broker and starting to build out that delivery team. How do you process loans? How do you essentially start to work yourself more further and further out of the business and essentially arriving at a full business management system? So where would you like to start on this one?
Yeah, it's a really important topic, and it's obviously an evolution of what we've been talking about this month, right? Okay, we're sort of boiling it down to some first principles, right? So the first thing is to accept is there might be one overarching system, which is the first time you spot a client till 10 years down the track when they sell their house and leave your book, for example. But within that, we've got essentially three systems that combine to make one end-to-end solution. I think that's the first thing to note. So you've got what we call, the lead onboarding system. And this is a really interesting one. I'll come back to that in a minute. Then you've got, what happens with a client once you've got the lead from that point right through to settlement. And then you've got how do you care and nurture that client and the relationship, including your compliance and everything else, but also wowing them and nurturing them on an ongoing basis. So you've got these three workflows and processes and systems that need to be packed together. And I think that's really important for our listeners to know is it's very hard to work on all three of these or set all three up at the one time. And the way we would generally do this, right, is let's get the loan process flow, i.e. once you've got the client in the door or a prospect, let's map that out because that's where you can save the most time and get the most system benefit. And then we see this a lot, right, James, is, well, what if I get leads from referral partners versus leads from digital advertising versus leads from word of mouth versus leads from working my database? So you've got all these different sorts of ways to bring on leads. They all share some common tasks, but they all have their own separate tasks. They have different conversion rates, different ways you might interact with them at the starting gate. Like you'd interact differently with a referral lead than you would with someone who opted in on Facebook to download your ebook, right? So there's that workflow. And then at the other end, equally important, in fact, would argue more important, is, well, once you've got the client in the door, what are you doing to nurture, maintain that relationship, but also to generate more business off that relationship? So you got all of these three systems. And then, as you said in the intro, well, what's your overarching business management system look like? And that's all those things: HR, risk management, your operational system, your reporting system, your compliance system, your management system, your operational rhythm, how often you meet, do you meet daily, weekly, monthly? All of those things are your overall management system. So without making it sound too complex, this is the journey that you're on as a business builder, right? Is to understand, is there an order to do this? Which one should come first? Do you stack them all on one tech platform? Are they separate? So I'm just throwing all these thoughts out there. James, interested in where you think this all sits. It's obviously the go completely hands-off episode, right? So the ultimate destination is this system. You get to a point that you could hire an experienced manager who could come in look at everything you've got documented with your systems and processes and run the business because it's all there.
Yeah, I love it. It's a great intro, and it's not easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it. So there's complexity to it, 100%. But yeah, I think what you mapped out is perfect because that's the baseline, isn't it? You've got those three core systems: the lead process, the loan process, the client process. Essentially, how does the broker get people in the door systematically, help them with the loans, and then nurture them? So they're the baseline systems, aren't they? Like that we need to have in a mortgage business. And there's actually a few more rungs above that for our listeners. So we obviously want to map that out. Like in any business, we need to have those three areas systemized. So above that, you've obviously got team. So a solo broker, this episode is relevant for solo brokers through to those with substantial teams, right? So if what you mapped out before, Ash, the lead loan client process, let's assume first that the broker is doing all of that solo upfront. And the next rung up from that is we've got those systems, that foundation. So now we want to start to build a support team around it. So focusing and enabling that broker to be able to do the things they're best at and bring the highest and best use to the business, and start to build out a conveyor belt for the rest. So that's starting to build out the team level. That's where a lot of brokers sort of stop, that supported broker model. Yeah, I've got rid of loan processing, I've got rid of some admin, maybe I've hired some credit para broking. That's where most stop. Getting to the next level up, which is business management, is essentially getting yourself to the point where either you or somebody else is managing the team. So you're no longer writing loans, you're no longer in that process. And that's where you've got that business management layer. As you said, Ash, there's all sorts of HR and reporting and admin things to make sure that the team's firing, managing KPIs, who's across everything. Someone's got to be across it. And then the next layer up from that is, well, the business owner. So, you want to eventually try and get yourself to the very top, which is the business owner. And the only way you can really do that is by having everything systemized, having a team to run it all, but also having somebody to make sure that the team is running it all. And to fully do that properly, you can't just have those basic systems. You can't just have the team. You've got to have the business management system in place to make sure that you as the business owner have oversight. Are people actually doing the right thing? Is your investment working? Are you pulling out money out of the business, et cetera, et cetera? And it's relatively involved, but it's the final frontier, I guess, to building a business, isn't it?
Final frontier. That sounds like the opening to Star Trek. For anybody over the age of maybe 50, space is not the final frontier. Getting somebody to run your business for you might be the final frontier. Hey, James.
Yeah.
You've hit the nail on the head, and I still think it's probably right up there with the single biggest blockages. So you build great systems, great workflows, you've got a team, you've got all of this great stuff, but you still can't get away from the business. Why is that? It's because systems are just systems. They are still dependent on someone making sure they work, making sure people do the job, making sure it's accurate. So the piece of the puzzle here is, where in your plan are you timing or considering having somebody to essentially run the business? I would say it's probably the greatest structural pivot point for most brokers that might be pretty good at other things, but they hit the brick wall right there. I've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people working for me, whatever. I'm making a bit of money, decent volume of loans, but I still have this mental baggage or mental weight on me that says, if I don't check in on stuff every day, it doesn't happen, or I'm worried that it won't happen. So I would say this is something to be very, very clear, or certainly clear in your thinking as you can be, about at what point are you going to employ someone to sit between you and the business. You can call it whatever you like: operations manager, practice manager. I've come to call it the integrator lately, who basically integrates everything. They make sure everything happens. The buck stops with them. They only come to you if they absolutely have to. That's sort of the aspirational point for a lot of business owners in any industry, including mortgage broking, right? Because until you've got that person, it's very, very hard to be truly hands off. And this doesn't mean you're not involved in the business, James. I said this last episode, right? Just because you hire an integrator and they're great at the job and you could basically go away for 3 months and no one would know you weren't there, that doesn't mean that's what you're planning to do. It just means you're able to, as a value creation process, as much as anything, because the business is worth so much more. If somebody happened to knock on your door and say, hey, I'm interested in buying your business, how much do you want? And you say, oh, I want this. And they go, great. Then they lift up the hood. And if under the hood they see, oh, if the business owner that's there now is not there tomorrow, will all of this continue? And if the answer is no, guess what? Your offer suddenly goes southward very quickly. But if they can go, you know what? This business is so well organized and it's proven to be able to be run without the owner, because here's this person running it right now that's based on skill, expertise, and following a process. Great. The business is worth a lot more.
Yeah, it's the difference between selling your business for what, 2-3 times trail and 7-8 times EBIT, for example. It's a massive difference. Ash, one thing I'm just picking up on what you said for our listeners is, and this goes back to how we teach building team, right? You don't just build a team and then hope to systemize it. You work out what the system is, then you plug the right people into those roles. Systems first, then team. I think one of the crucial distinctions in this episode is that this rule continues for business management. So as a broker with a support team, I'm looking to get my GM, office manager, whatever you want to call it, integrations person. You also have to have a system for the business management. It's not, I'm going to hire a GM and just hope for the best. Like, we already have a business management system in place in terms of, here's the reporting we have, here's the meetings we have, this is how decisions are made. We have systems for admin and HR and all of those sorts of things. So maybe comment on that, because we spend so much time systemizing up front, but when we start to get into management, a lot of people will just hire a good manager or hope to hire a good manager to come and look after it, but they don't actually have a management system to make sure that you as the business owner have the oversight of that person managing your business. Does that make sense?
Totally. And there's one extra layer to that, if I may add, and that is the person who comes in to do it needs to come with proven management expertise. That's certainly an error of decision making I've made. And, I went through these iterations. A lot of brokers might relate to this. So I went through the iterations of hiring someone to help me out when I didn't have systems, thinking, oh, they'll just take the pressure off me and stuff will magically fall into the grooves and be okay. No. Second time round, great. Systems, processes, team, got all that figured out and the business hummed along. Oh, I am going to put someone into management because I like them and I know them and they're ambitious. Great. Put them into the role. Not so great. Did not work out well at all because they didn't have the expertise, training, and experience to apply to a management system. So I had the management system, but the person just didn't have the skill, and I was busy and distracted and off doing other things with the business. And so because they didn't have those skills, expertise, they weren't able to comprehend and execute. So it's equally important to get the right person who has the skills, ambition, expertise to do that. And then the last, but certainly not least component is, how do you retain the right person? This episode is not about retaining the right people necessarily, but it is part of the overall discussion of I guess, going fully hands off, is to know that if you get the right person and you've got all the management systems and it's all humming, Well, what if they get a better offer somewhere else? What am I going to do? Right? I have separated myself from the business, but now I'm dependent on that person staying. Right? So I've got dependency off me, but on them. So a lot of that is ameliorated, I would agree, by having systems and processes that you can hire another skilled person. But most of us don't want to go through this. I did some research on this not long ago, James, about the cost of hiring and replacing employees. It's about 30% of their annual salary. So if you've got a manager you're paying 150 grand, to replace them will cost you 50 grand, right? So not necessarily going to go any further with that, but you certainly need to factor into, how do I retain the right person in my business ongoing in a way that works for them but works for me. So that's probably a discussion for another day. So yeah, the right system overlaid with the right management and business operating system, overlaid with the right trained, skilled, experienced person, overlaid with the right retention strategy. So, James, can I make it any more complicated?
Well, yeah, that's why not many do it, but that's the layering that we need to be thinking. And let's go one step further. In a business management system, it's not one person. For example, in our business, when we built out our original management team, there was a head of coaching, there's a head of admin, there's a general management person. It's not one person, and for a mortgage business, it's the same. You may have an office manager or a GM, but depending on the size of your business, you may need other people in charge of areas. You might have a virtual assistant team overseas. Let's say you've got a dozen VAs overseas that are processing and doing settlement work, data entry, etc. Well, need to be a head of your admin team that's in charge of running that team, driving KPIs, reporting back to management. And one of the key things I think we've said already, Ash, but for our listeners, the key thing is, and you sort of said it before, but it's all well and good to have a system and a team, but what if someone leaves? Like, what's lacking in a lot of businesses is not that there's the system or the team, maybe they've even got a GM, but if someone leaves, do you have a process that one of your team can follow to replace and train and onboard and upskill and manage that person without you there? Like, that's that full hands-off business. It's the head of admin team is managing capacity. They're in charge of hiring and firing and making sure there's enough VAs to produce enough loans, to write enough loans. So I think that's part of it as well, Ash, is it's the business management people, as well as the ability to make the decisions, hire, replace, and report without you having to be there. Because, for example, you might have this amazing team and you put a GM in front of it and you just go off onto the beach, and then a week later, one of your key brokers leaves, or you lose a couple of VAs. And if you don't have the systems to hire, train, and onboard and replace, you're still going to be in a really sticky position. And that office manager or GM is not going to be able to do that. You need systems for making sure they can manage that. It's getting complicated, but this is not
well, systems replace genius, right? What we don't want to fall into the trap of is allowing genius to become the belief system in the business that, because we've got this genius that can figure stuff out and they're just a great problem solver, etc., etc., etc. That's not an operating system. That's reliant on a genius. You can't replace a genius with a genius. So systems replace that. So when you're going about building this out, there's so many moving parts. So the thing for me is, how do we imagine that in advance, right? And I started doing a lot of this work with our clients, James, and I would advise anybody to start thinking about this now, is what is the organizational chart of the future of your business look like? Like, it might be you plus a VA plus someone else right now. But let's say you're working towards a strategy. I want to write $20 million a month. I want to have a good business that I make $500,000 a year and it's worth a few $1,000,000, and in 5 or 10 years' time, I can sell it. But just as a loose statement there. So what does the organizational chart of that business look like? What's the chain of command? As you said, who are the department heads? Who do they report to? So what does that organizational chart look like? And I've asked a lot of broker business owners this question. Show me your organizational chart. I don't have one. Show me the organizational chart of your ideal business. Don't have one. Right? It's very hard to build out those things that you touched on, James, if you haven't already thought about, well, what would an organizational chart look like in this business of my vision? So that certainly would be something for all of our listeners. Go away with a piece of paper and a bit of where you've got some time and just dream and think about, if my business gets to the stage I want it to get to, where I'm at this elevated leadership role rather than up to my earlobes in operations, what would the organizational chart look like? Sales and marketing, admin, culture and compliance, whatever it happens to be. I think that's a great exercise for anyone to do, to think about what that structure would look like and what it would cost to run, which will help you understand the level of volume you've got to produce in order to extract the profit and the value that you want.
Exactly. And there's usually a lot more to it, right? There's a broker can build out a support team around them and think they've got a good business. But when they really dive into it, the amount of things that are still being done by that key person, if you were to replace that in terms of staff, it's a lot. So when you start building out a business, you might not be in delivery anymore, but you're across all the admin and compliance and HR and all this sort of stuff. So you need who's going to market, who's going to sell, who's going to manage the managers. And that all comes back into that final business model that you need to think about from day one. And what sort of profitability does it need to be at? How does it look? Because if we don't think about this in detail, we could build something that doesn't work, isn't profitable, or we don't like it. So I love that you keep bringing it back to that first principles.
Well, that's probably a good wrap-up point to me, James. We've sort of teased this out and I guess laid on the table the complexity, but also the challenge and the opportunity that business builders face to get to go hands off. And I would say, honestly, the best thing to do is to pick up the phone and call us, because even if it's just a talk, because I certainly get that told to me a lot. I'm sure you do too, James, is just talking to someone about this stuff who knows what they're doing is half the battle to help get it out of your head and start to organize it and coalesce it into a plan. But whilst it's spinning around in your head on your own, it's just going to corrode your thinking. So yeah, get on the phone, reach out, have a chat with us about, how this all can work and look. And just by talking through that part of it will clear up your mind a lot.
Agree, 100%. That should go without saying, listeners, that doing this by yourself is a very tough exercise. So it gives a buzz. Hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. It's been a relatively complicated one. Well, you don't get to build a full hands-off business without a little bit of complexity in there. And at the other side of all this complexity is actually a quite simple result for you as the business owner. But you got to work through it. So there's more in this space. If you haven't watched or listened to the last couple of episodes on systemizing and going hands-off, do that. We've got two more episodes for the rest of this month on systemizing your business. So stay tuned for what's coming up in the next week or two. Ash, I will be seeing you again next week, listeners. Hopefully I'll see you as well. So have a great week.
Yeah, been a good one, James. I'll see you next week.
All right. Bye for now, everybody.